Welcome. I'm Tristan Burlingame from Franklin Pierce University, and as well as a member of our Institute for Climate Action. And we are having a panel discussion today about COVID to climate change and what we can do about it. I'd like to begin by saying humans have an extraordinary talent of learning from our experiences and taking the past and converting it in order to apply it to our future. I think that this global pandemic of COVID-19 has tested our ability to react on a global scale. I think that we need to dissect and analyze this situation in order to apply it beyond the short-term solutions into things such as infrastructure for crisis responses of the future. I think that there are two major points that we can learn from this. And beginning, I think that we have proven to ourselves that we can react as a community, as the earth can come together and we can deal with crises such as this. And I believe that we need to remember that if we get one lesson out of this, it's that if you are witnessing the full extent of a crisis, it's too late for proper preparation and management of the situation. And with this idea, we can apply it to a crisis that has been developing since the Industrial Revolution and is often overlooked or underestimated, and that is the topic of climate change. Climate change, however, is not a silver lining of COVID-19. It is, however, our responsibility to extract what we can from this situation in order to better prepare ourselves for the future and make sure that the future generations have the same world that we do and the same opportunities that we do. I'd like to introduce our three panelists. We have Ayo Oyuhuru, we've got Victoria St. Jean, and Cassandra Jaskolski. Ayo, would you like to start?
Hi, everyone. So what I'd like to start off with is how the environment is directly affected by the COVID-19 and the coronavirus. And basically what COVID-19 is doing for us is basically giving us this wake-up call that climate action is possible, and that even though that we are still in stay-at-home orders and we're on lockdown, we are given proof that we can lower our emissions. And one thing that I realized that I saw this happening is with the viral videos that we're seeing animals in their towns and in their cities. And it's showing that we are all connected to the environment if we just walk outside our doors and look outside of our windows, and we see that we are all connected. And one thing that I'm starting to think about is, what are we going to do when these stay-at-home orders are going to be over? When we go back to starting our businesses and driving around and going back to school, what changes can we make looking at the fact that we can change and help the environment as much as possible?
You need to take these experiences.
Yeah, basically.
The future.
I feel like the more we're pushed into our homes, the more euphoric and more appreciation we'll have when we finally get that real step outside.
Definitely. I think it will grow and maybe even start just a new appreciation of the nature that we have around us, and that the environment that we have that we should protect because we're a part of that environment. I think too many times people see humans as separate from the environment, but we really are a part of the entire system.
Absolutely. Would our next panelist like to go? Victoria St. Jean.
Of course. So I just wanted to start off explaining what the coronavirus is, what COVID-19 is. And COVID-19 is a part of a bigger family of coronaviruses that are zoonotic diseases. So they start in wild animals, and those viruses or diseases are transmitted to us or transmitted to domestic animals and then to us in some sort of way. And that can be through direct contact or indirect contact, but it depends on the virus. COVID-19 is not the same as other coronaviruses. It is different in the way it spreads and how long it lasts on different surfaces, and even the way it can spread like through, there's some coronaviruses that can spread through food, but just because you don't wash your food well enough, it does not mean you're going to get sick with COVID-19 or another illness. And one of the ways that it spreads is having contact with wild animals. And as our population has grown all over the world, we've had to move deeper and deeper into wildlife habitat. So that has been through deforestation, and other forms of destruction of habitat for things like agriculture and development of cities. And that puts us directly in a wild animal's backyard. So that has an effect on their life and our life, and if we're interacting with them, those sicknesses can pop up.
Very good. Our next panelist, Cassandra Jaskolski. Would you like to start?
Thanks, Tristan. So, though the people have had a positive impact on the environment, the government has had a negative impact and has taken advantage of the environment during Corona. So the American Petroleum Institute was having troubles through COVID and reached out to the head of the EPA, Andrew Wheeler, and asked for assistance. And the EPA responded and suspended enforcement of US environmental laws. So that means that facilities such as factories and power plants can regulate themselves. And them regulating themselves, meaning that there will be no fines issued for water, air, and hazard waste violations. And also on a local note, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Illinois bans reusable bags for grocery stores, and Maine lifts their plastic bag ban. There's little to no evidence showing that plastic retains less or more bacteria than your reusable bags from home. And there are no World Health Organizations or CDC guidelines against reusable bags.
At this point, I'd like to invite the audience into discussion as they see fit. Does anyone have anything to add?
Well, I think you guys did a great job of showing that, you know, climate change and COVID are both really serious demonstrations of how people and humans, you know, are interacting, and these interactions have become kind of negative in a lot of places. You know, Tori made the great point about the wildlife markets and how that's, you know, people pushing out into the wild habitat has affected that. But I wasn't quite clear, Tori, can you kind of explain a little bit more about the wildlife markets and that part? I didn't quite get that.
Yeah, okay. So particularly with COVID-19, there's a lot of research that's gone into where it originated and if it was in the wet markets in Wuhan, China. And the wet markets are basically a place where people in Wuhan can go to get their meat. And it's slaughtered right there in front of them. So that goes with chicken, different types of animals, any sort of meat that they need, as well as fish. And there was no evidence found that a bat was there, because the COVID-19 virus originates in bats, and there was no evidence that the animal was there. But scientists are pretty certain that the bat transmitted the virus to the animals that were there, and people then bought the animals and ate them, and that's how it spread. But there's also evidence showing that there might have not been presence of COVID-19 in the wet market, and it stemmed from somewhere else, but it kind of spread in that market. So, and there was such a big incline of cases after that. That's why they shut it down and they looked into that market. And it just goes to show that with our growing population and with our growing demand for food, people have to integrate more and more into wild habitat, and this is why these interactions with wild animals are increasing.
I have a question for Tori. What's the percentage of modern diseases, human diseases, that are caused by, you called it zoonotic
Yeah.
connections?
So scientists estimate that for every 10 known infectious diseases, 6 of them are zoonotic. So they've stemmed from wild animals. And common sicknesses that stem from animals are in the influenza virus, SARS, which was another coronavirus, stemmed from wild animals. There's even evidence that certain types of HIV stemmed in wild populations. So there's a lot of evidence that these emerging infectious diseases come from animals. And a lot of them stem in Africa, where there's a lot of agriculture and a lot of deforestation happens to keep up agriculture. So as they move more and more into these wild habitats and have interaction, more of these infectious diseases emerge and spread to all different parts of the world. And I think that has a direct connection with climate change as well, because as more of these forests are cut down, that's more carbon being put into the air and less trees to take in our carbon that we're emitting into the atmosphere.
Thank you.
Of course. Yep. Next question.
I have a question for our moderator, Tristan. You mentioned, I think in relation to COVID, that once the crisis is upon us, it's too late to prepare, and that pretty much happened in this case. Do you think it's possible that the greater population would be able to see a parallel between what happened in the COVID, the pandemic, and climate change? So it starts out slow, and you think, well, how could this affect the whole world and so on? But the scientists say it's going to happen, and the time to prepare is when it's still, when it's hardly visible, when you can still deal with it and make changes that will prevent the peak, will flatten the curve. Do you think that it's possible people will be able to appreciate that parallel?
I do. I think that if we are able to get it into that idea to be conveyed through government officials, higher powers, where they're able to speak to large audiences, I think that combined with the relatability that we now are able to apply into it, because I know, at least in my experience, I had never been through something such as this, and it was hard for me to think about climate change, because if someone tells you something's going to happen but you don't really see any signs, it's tough to wrap your mind around that. But in this case, I did the same thing. When they said there was a virus spreading around, I brushed it off essentially for the first couple of weeks, and I thought it's not affecting us right now. There's no way it would have any consequence on me personally. And sure enough, exactly what was said was going to happen happened, and it has affected all of us. And I think that experience, especially so recently and so close to our deadlines for preventing irreversible damage to our climate, I think that people will be able to correlate the two a lot easier, as long as we convey that to them and make sure we establish that connection, that relationship between the two events. And if you put it into people's heads freshly out of this situation we are currently in, I think that it will be much easier for people to understand and to actually want to help, actually take action towards preparation and prevention. So yeah, I do think that there's hope for us to deal with this climate change situation coming out of the pandemic. Yes, question.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, I've been so heartened by the initiative shown by students in the Climate Action Group on the Franklin Pierce campus. You guys are all to be applauded. And my question is sort of relates to that. It's for Cassie, but anybody can feel free to contribute. Some of the things you mentioned, Cassie, were quite disturbing, and I'm just wondering if you or anyone else on the panel can talk about advocacy steps that people can take to fight back against some of the steps that some of these companies are taking.
I would say for us, the people, right now, the main thing we have with each other is social media. And I feel like just attacking social media. And I know on my personal social media, I've been posting and saying things that are going on environmentally in the world, so that some people never get a chance to see. They don't know what's going on, like they really don't know. So how are they supposed to change if they don't even know what's going on? So I think advocacy that way. It's kind of tough times right now since we can't really go out into public areas, you know, and go and be telling everybody, but definitely utilizing social media.
And Cassie, don't you also, or anyone else can chime on this? I mean, you know, what you basically described is that COVID-19 is being used as an excuse, excuse the barking dog, an excuse to decrease environmental protection. And doesn't that sort of, the parallel with the climate change is pretty clear. This is, you know, shows this disrespect for the environment. And I think someone mentioned it earlier, this idea that humans aren't part of nature. Like some people seem to think that that's the case. Humans aren't part of nature, so we can do whatever we want. But so I don't know if you want to comment on that, Cassie or anybody.
We definitely are nature. I think everything we do impacts the environment. Everything that any other organism, whether that be an animal or a bacteria, affects the environment, as we're seeing right now. And I think we have the biggest impact. We've been doing everything. And like how I said before, you step outside, nature. And even our homes are built with nature. Everything is nature. Like everything has to come from the earth or else it wouldn't be here.
I think once we realize that when you're damaging the environment, you're damaging your home, you're damaging yourself. It's not humans trying to take care of the environment. It's essentially we're trying to take care of ourselves, and that's the way people need to look at it. And I also think that the greatest method of advocacy, to go back to that last thing, is action. Because I think action carries a lot further than words, and I've experienced it in my life. Such as if I talk someone's ear off about why we should recycle, or why you pick up trash when you see it outside on the ground, the little things like that, they brush it off because that's what people do. But when I don't say a word and we're just walking and I pick something up off the ground, just a little piece of trash, I could easily walk by, but you just pick it up. People notice that. And it inspires other people to act in the same way. So I think just lifestyle choices are the greatest form of advocacy.
I think also that the personal aspect plays into a big part of like higher levels, which is like locally and federally. And one thing that I feel we need to start talking about a little bit more is that whatever we do is going to impact the environment. We right now are not using a lot of like modes of transportation, but once we are trying to get our economy booming and people working again, we're going to see that rise of emissions that aren't going to go back to normal, but they're going to exceed what we've already been seeing before this coronavirus became a topic. And seeing that short term, the differences that we have been making in the short term of like just a month, that we're seeing the effects of not using as much. I really want to know what exactly we can do, like on a federal and like local level, like even so, on how we can make our economy better, but in a way that we're not being detrimental to the environment as well.
I mean, I think one of the things that's going to come out is a lot more emphasis on local. You know, I mean, so many people are so worried about like feeding themselves. I mean, people gardening is going crazy, but they're also, and you know, the community supported agriculture is going crazy. So I think people are going to start appreciating that they can get what they need to survive in their own community without having to worry about it coming from across the world where they're, you know, maybe people are sick over there. And so I think that's going to be a permanent thing.
Pat, would you like to go next? Saw your hand
Yeah,
up.
I just wanted to ask Io, something like 30% of the jobs were saved because people could work from home. What do you think the potential is that, you know, that's got to have a big impact on emissions if 30% of the population, you know, it's not going to be 100% like it is now, but if 30% could still work from home, do you think that would be acceptable to people?
I think that, again, there's always going to be pros and cons to everything that we do. And it kind of comes down to how is that fair in a sense. But personally, I think that if we can use these practices that we're doing right now and putting them into our lives after we're not in stay-at-home orders, I think that that will make a big difference. So maybe not working from home for every single day of the week, because then that's giving you a little bit more free time to possibly do other things that may not be good for the environment, but trying to figure out that middle ground between everything.
Does anyone else have any other comments? Professor Rogers.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to all the panelists. You've all made very powerful points about our interconnection with nature, that we are really a part of it. And this whole COVID-19 pandemic has kind of demonstrated all the ways which really are a part of it there. And the time really is now to, I guess, to pounce on that fact. And I think that what we need is a real a change in philosophical orientation globally here in our relationship to nature. And I think, Tristan, what you were saying, what all of you have been saying in various ways, shapes, and forms is we really have to kind of build a new way of thinking into everything we do post pandemic here, once we get back out there on the streets again. And I think that's a task before us all. And it's going to have to start, it probably will have to start, as Catherine was saying, on the local level and percolate up, you might say, in a way there. And I think to kind of look ahead in the next few months here, I'll just say elections matter at all levels. We have to have some new thinking there at all these levels, local right up to the national level, with this kind of new philosophical orientation there in place to start moving in the right direction. And that's going to be a tall order. And I think maybe this type of thing that we're doing today is something that kind of starts that. We're actually putting these ideas out there about thinking differently about things. Not that we have all the answers right at the moment. It's a very complex problem in many ways, but it's good to start thinking about it and go in this direction. So thank you for all you've said today.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to offer that thanks to the panelists and to emphasize what seems to have been the gist of what a number of people have been saying. This time of transition, when we move out of the health emergency and presumably, you know, back, or well, we have to move forward as opposed to back, because there's going to be a powerful urge. We're human beings. We want to get back to the way it was. You know, and that means driving our cars everywhere and flying everywhere. and we're going to probably be in a recession. You know, there's going to be all sorts of emphasis on getting the economic engine restarted. But if we don't take some of these lessons and we don't learn from some of the new things, such as what we're doing right now, using technology as opposed to face-to-face, if we don't learn those lessons, and if we don't come out of this on learning really from this COVID crisis, to apply these lessons to climate change, we'll have lost a great opportunity. So I think for our institute, these months ahead are really critical. This is where, with our own community, we can help to steer people, that's the wrong way to put it, lead people in a direction of a new way of living, as opposed to just rushing back to the old way and putting ourselves in grave jeopardy with perhaps the next natural catastrophe, which would be the climate crisis.
One thing I'd like to bring up too, as we seem to be wrapping it up a little bit here, is the idea that, I mean, one important parallel between these two crises with the natural world is that the marginalized people are far less represented and also much more vulnerable, both to climate change and to the COVID. You know, I mean, you don't have a say. You know, it's one thing to stay at home, but what if you don't have a home, or if your home's not safe, or you don't have access to stocking up on food? And you know, hopefully that will be another lesson that we grasp and sort of remember, you know, all those people, and try to give them more of a voice and, you know, more access to resources. So that's something that I think a number of people are paying attention to, and we need to keep our eye on that as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing I learned during the pandemic is that consumer spending is 2/3 of our economy. That means that we actually have quite a bit of power in this economy to make changes. And I hope that, you know, we'll keep that in mind. The working people, really, without us, there is no economy.
Absolutely. Professor
Think-
Rogers?
Yeah, thanks. One thing that occurred to me, we have a large number of people, I think, in this country and many places that are feeling that they don't necessarily have, you know, meaningful work or a meaningful work future and so on. And a big thing we're going to have to do is try to convince these people that looking at things and doing things in a new way will actually result in meaningful jobs for them down the road too, that we don't have to go back to the, you know, petroleum-based economy to have meaningful work and so on. And we can really change some things we do and still keep people employed in gainful ways and meaningful ways. I think there's a big fear out there. There's a lot of inertia, of course, going forward. You want to go back to the ways you've always done things, just easier. But you also have to convince people that there's something for them in all of this too. It's not just you know, those of us thinking about these things in academic centers that and making pronouncements about it, but there's something meaningful for all concerned here, that we can have both environmental protection and, you know, meaningful lives for everybody. So it's a tall order, but I think we have to try to start moving that way. And again, as I said earlier, I think this is kind of one of those things that's starting in that direction here, this little discussion we've had today. It's been very enlightening.
If there are no further comments.
I just had one last thing I wanted to say too, that you know, one of my biggest concerns, and I hope is coming out really clearly through the COVID thing, is the perceptions of science, you know, using data to make decisions. You know, we have a government that doesn't want to do that right now. And it's, I think, really clear how important that is. And so there's very strong parallels with climate change and COVID there. So that was just one of my pet peeves that I hope we can change. But that is the last thing I have to say.
Well, glad we had this conversation. I think it's very important. I think it's very important that this kind of thinking gets out into the public and is carried further than this discussion right here, and is able to be converted into the real world, and we can make some changes, and we can come out of this this crisis better prepared for the future than we ever have been. We hope everyone's doing safe, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey,
Take care.
yeah, we'll just wrap it up there, and we'll get it off to Andy, and we'll try to be watching ourselves on YouTube. If you didn't send in your permission, your release, please do that. Okay,
I don't think
just an email reply.
no.
I agree.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
All
That was
right.
Okay.
great, everybody. I think we
Yeah.
came in right about at 30 minutes, so that's perfect.
Good.
Very
You
well
guys did
done.
great. Thank you
Yeah,
so much
great,
for all
great
your
job,
hard work.
panelists.
Awesome.
Thank you,
It was
guys.
very nerve-wracking, but
No, you did great.
You
Yeah.
did great.
Yep.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
thank you
All
guys.
right.
Yeah, thank
Thanks,
you.
Pat.
Thank you.
Terrific job,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.